Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back everyone to the FPL Script. This is episode 16, but Gameweek 17. We have taken a bit of a break, so sorry about the whole delay and pause with the show, but glad to be back on track, especially ahead of I think a pretty big run of fixtures where a lot of us are going to be planning ahead towards double game week 24, which is highly expected. We'll talk about that in a moment, but also I think quite a few fundamental shifts within the game in terms of I think some of the positions and how we prioritize over certain players. I think we're starting to see a pretty thinned list of players, but then there's a lot of budget players that we might ascribe value to that I think will be quite interesting. We've had a lot of game weeks since then, so couple movements in terms of our teams. I've been very fortunate recently, more specifically last game week, with a pretty nice green finally. And yeah, I know it's not fun to say that. I've been speaking to Marcin, for example, who's also had a pretty tough time, as have yourself in FPL. And I know when I mention luck or unlucky, it doesn't mean much in your position with the sort of negative variance. But yeah, I'm super happy with the team. Got a Lewis Hall, Isak, who I feel pretty rewarded for because I went kind of against, like a review default sort of line, which was to keep Solanke for a while. And Mbumo has really come and shown through the last two game weeks. So yeah, lots of things went my way last game week, and it was a good game week rank.
So before we discuss my game week and perhaps a little brief history of the season, you bought Isaac at 8.4, right? So I guess
I did, yeah. I did, yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think this is the second time you've jumped on Isaac pretty early. The last time was in 22-23, I believe, towards the
that's true.
The end of that season. Yeah. So yeah.
What's funny actually is I missed out on Isaac last year, who I think would have actually full sent me to an even better position at FPL.
Yeah.
Like I have deep regrets on underrating Isaac, but I think it's always the case on Isaac where he's a very injury prone player. I think review recognizes that, which is why his decay is always very, very aggressive. But sometimes missing out on 5 to 6 game weeks in a row of Isaac playing 95 minutes, that's a huge loss of MD sometimes. And obviously he's a very good player if you can get him fit. And sometimes I just think it's worth it. I also had Luis Diaz last season competing versus Isaac, and yeah, he wasn't so great. So that's that. Yeah. Sorry, but leaving that back to you.
Yeah. So and another thing we must mention is obviously Kuna's ban, a potential ban. We still don't know because the FA has worded it such that it could perhaps not even be a ban. I don't see how that is going to happen, but I'm just saying, like, nowhere do they specify that it's going to be for X amount of games or something like that. It's just that they've charged him. So I'm not going to ask people, or if someone asks me if they should sell him, there's no need to do that right away. Also because it's Leicester away. If he manages to play that game, it's going to be brilliant for his owners. If he is banned after the game. So yeah, coming to my game week, I mean, I don't know what to say other than it's been bad. But I guess selling Haaland finally got me some points. So maybe I should have done that like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, I the thing is, and this is where maybe adapting to circumstances is necessary, which is that his EV has actually gone down. Now the exact numbers we will come up with that before next week, or we will discuss that in next week's pod because we do have all the data from review, and it is going to be really interesting to see how markets have devalued his EV versus how MD or massive data has been performing in terms of Haaland. But and Fran tracks this much better than I do. So anecdotally, I think he's already seen this sort of effect with City's team strength now reflecting even more accurately, I suppose, because of the sample size of, let's say, 7 to 10 game weeks now, or 10 weeks worth of data where they've been consistently worse than their previous, let's say, 5-year average. So there's something to that definitely, and of course losing like that to United is not going to help. With, I guess that was Haaland's worst performance of all the games that I've seen him play. That and then the Juventus one as well, where I don't think he even got like a good XG chance in either of those games, which is of course concerning. And at the whole point, I kept him for this long is because he was still getting XG, which is the whole point. And he stopped getting that now. I think that started from the Liverpool game. I don't think he had a ton of XG in that game, but he did have some chances, and then it's just gone downhill from there. So that's absolutely killed my season. But hopefully, going Nomium is going to help me, because in that way I can at least now have Trent. I can keep Son, Saka, Palmer. I can bring in Bruno, which is my plan. And I completely missed out on the Brendan Johnson drop, by the way, because I was away and I did not have access to internet. So when I checked today to when I was going to sell Brennan, and I saw that he already dropped in price, so I lost the selling price on him, selling value. So just gonna wait till Friday, because I don't think Bruno is going to rise in any case. Because even though he scored 9 points against City, I don't see a lot of transfers in for him anyway. So we'll see what happens. But the 8-2 his red card was just funny, man. It's when it's going bad, it just goes from bad to worse. It's just hilarious. And then Colville, that was the worst part, I think, because I just left my room when it was 1-0. No, 2-0. And then when I came back, it was 2-1, and Mbumo had already scored. So that sort of wrecked any chance of having a good game week, because I believe I was on 0.5 positive variance, and when Mbumo scored, I went from 0.5 to minus 0.6. Minus 6. Sorry. So yeah, enough about that. Let's move on to something a little more cheerful than my season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So are we not gonna relitigate Haaland, Salah, that sort of thing, or should we just move on?
In what sense?
Like, I think just in terms of how ridiculous it's been. Like,
oh yeah. Sorry, yeah. That
I feel like it's fair. It's fair to give some time to it. Because yeah, I mean, like, I think the worst part too is just, when you own one asset, you're always more than likely, or an unpopular asset, I suppose, or one that people are selling, that there's always like one competing asset. I think for most of this time it's been in Salah, right? For most people who've kept Haaland. So I think, the fact that Salah's gone absolutely nuclear on the perfect game weeks, and even that Palmer captaincy being the icing on the cake in that Tottenham game is just mental. So I think it's been super unfortunate. I mean, I've seen teams week on week, and I think one thing that people miss as well, and I miss this too when speaking with you, like, a lot of us had very specific teams coming probably from a wildcard 6, and that sort of meta of a team seemingly got, the sort of review recommendation to move out of Haaland. Even if you, let's say, like as we've always said, if you think Haaland can last, he doesn't get injured, and you apply the less aggressive decay on Haaland, for me, it was still the case that I should have sold Haaland on paper, right, as my top line move on Gaming 10. But for other people like yourself, I think that's not really been a top line move. So it's been rather unfortunate, I think. Unfortunately, the kind of path that you've been on, and very few people are on that path. I know Luke himself is someone who's held Haaland almost. I think he might still own Haaland now.
No. He sold last week for Salah.
Yeah. Which is totally fair, because I think Salah had quite a fair bit of EV this game week, and I guess, were you priced out of Salah in a sense, or did you just want to go Isak, I suppose?
No, so it stopped being about being priced out, right? Because I had 3 free transfers 2 game weeks ago, and I still could have moved into Salah. So I think it was the Newcastle away game where that was the one time where I did not get Salah as a top line, because obviously his EV was quite low in that game. I think it was sub 6 EV in that game. So I skipped out on that, and obviously he went nuclear in that game as well. And I was just looking at the tweet that Luke put out about, so in the past 10 game weeks, Haaland's on 35 points, and Salah's on 107, having played a game less.
Yeah.
Which is just, and of course, like you mentioned, the Palmer captaincy as well. So roughly he's calculated it to be 70 points versus 232, which is just obscene. I
It is,
mean,
yeah.
of course, there's free transfers involved, and perhaps there's some free transfers that I would not have been able to do. But the thing is, the free transfers I've used have been on Saka, who's blanked for 3 consecutive game weeks now.
Yep,
So
same.
there's not even any points. Yeah. I know you did the same, but you did Son to Saka
Yeah.
because obviously you already own Salah.
Yeah.
So there's that, and of course, it's hard to comprehend at some point, right? Because every week, when you start getting battered like this, there comes a point like what Luke did, right?
Yeah.
You can either acknowledge that, okay, fine, I'm just not going to I'm just going to play for 10 players and just not worry about this part, and then you reduce the scope of skill expression, which is already pretty limited in this game, or you do what I'm going to do, which is keep betting against because there's nothing to lose at this point.
Yeah.
uh, the only thing I'm going to ask Fran to do from next week is have, for example, this week it would have been 3,670k as my rank. So let's keep it at the same unit of measure, just for people to see how
Fair.
big of a difference it is.
Okay, fair. Um, yeah, no, I get that. It is just crazy. I mean, like,
Now, you know what the funny part is? When we started the podcast, we were
yeah,
literally in the same
I
position.
think we were almost every week we were like just about the same rank, basically.
No. I'm saying it is exactly like it was
Oh, right.
like it is today.
Yeah.
Because you had a good season. You were like top 10k or just outside top 10k, right? In that season.
Yeah.
And I had a variance not as abhorrent as Formadillo, but it was pretty close to that.
Yeah.
So this is just a repeat of that season from the looks of it. When I consistently backed Salah against Holland, and
Right.
now I'm consistently backing Holland against Salah, and not even that anymore. So yeah,
It's true. But I think that's the thing that's been nice that I've seen is and once again it goes back to like whether you have those unique picks, right? Because someone like Formadillo
yes,
had no Haaland, right? And actually that was the saving grace when he was competing against all those Salah hauls, is that he still had these like double digit hauls from Bruno, whereas Haaland has actually just, I mean, I made a post like what two game weeks ago where Haaland had like been 3 points away from Adam Armstrong. Like that's crazy because Adam Armstrong didn't even play half the games within a certain run of games from game week 6. And yeah, I mean, we won't talk about it more, but I think it's just a reflection of how insane the game is and how driven it is by like one or two players that are perfectly viable to own at the same time, but the results can be this devastating, basically.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Crystal Palace have scored, by the way. So congratulations to Arsenal for stringing a second string team. And maybe Eze gets a rest so that he can play really subpar minutes going ahead. No, I'm kidding. But let's just jump into the first segment that we wanted to discuss. It's sort of I think just the general calendar, right? What we know of it now. The Carabao Cup will have impacts later on in terms of blanking weeks, but it should really have a very soft impact. We also have Ben Crellin here, his chip strategy roughly after a lot of the latest news. So he's expecting the Everton versus Liverpool suspended match to move to Game Week 24. So a lot of us have been sort of anticipating that is going to be the case. I think 90% sure that it's going to happen like that, given if you look at, let's say, the calendar schedule, there's a pretty big gap in February for Liverpool to play that match. So I think that seems very plausible. On top of that, that means for anyone who hasn't triple captained, it's a very simple opportunity to triple captain Salah. And we just had a look at the EV, right? I think it's something like 13.4 or 12.4.
13 points.
Which is a gap of around 3.5, maybe from some of the previous Haaland captaincies versus like single opposition that's really poor. So looking like a net EV win there. On top of that, we have the general idea, which is with the assistant managership. I think we'll talk about that specifically, but the idea that you would wildcard later into the season when you have those big doubles and blanks, and you just kind of plan your chip strategy to be, playing, let's say, the assistant manager chip right after the wild card, and then with what Ben is suggesting here, free hitting on blank Game Week 34. Although we know, I think when you have a wild card, probably it's plausible that you can play exactly the same as last season, where a lot of the managers who didn't go with the meta strategy maybe were using a free hit in a double instead. It's hard to see where you do that because of how the assistant manager chip kind of blocks the use of, let's say,
Other chips, yeah.
a competing chip. So I think
Yeah.
there's going to be people who pursue a different strategy, but it does feel like this is so clearly the template strategy, right? And the only change might be who's your assistant manager between 31, 33, and how many transfers you're willing to, I suppose, throw over those 3 game weeks on certain managers that can give you a lot of upside. And I think that wild card, before that, all you really need to do is plan free transfers. I don't know what your thoughts are really like on this period and the calendar itself.
So obviously we'll talk specifics about the AM chip, but just in general, I was thinking, first of all, extremely lucky that Salah is going to get a double game week like this,
exactly.
which is yeah, exactly. And we have to acknowledge this. I mean, people that triple captain Holland in 2 did that with something in mind, which in an ideal world, or not even an ideal, let's say an average case, that would still have panned out, where we would not have had enough double game weeks to cover all the chips.
Yeah.
But and I've mentioned this many times on the pod that obviously not the storm, but I was gambling on something like this, like something out of the ordinary happening, and that has happened. So I'm guessing it's both. Like triple captainers 2 and 9. 2 can't count this as unlucky because they got 17 points, but 9 definitely can count themselves as unlucky. Although again, I keep coming back to if people owned him in 2, chose not to triple captain and then triple captain in 9, I still don't understand the rationale for that. I understand people who bought him in 9 to triple captain, but yeah, we don't need to rehash that. Looking at what Ben has posted, one thing that comes to mind is the budget that you need for your assistant manager has to be planned around the wild card, because I don't see myself spending retransfers to get money for the assistant manager, and then once the chip plays out, I then have to reinvest that money back into the squad with another free transfer. So I'm thinking that in either way, I have to use the wild card to offset one free transfer at least, or save one free transfer. And then the other free transfer is not necessarily, because the chip will just stop, like the assistant manager position will vacate, and then I'm assuming that the money will just drop back into ITB.
Yeah.
And once that happens, you can just use it for your free transfer. So that makes sense. Yeah, using it after wildcard seems to be the best strategy right now. My only concern is, I was thinking bench boost used to be that chip which we were always trying to get it closer to wildcard. But now, because this chip is worth so much, right?
Yeah.
Now this chip has to be prioritized, and you can happily sacrifice bench boost over this, because bench boost is 15 EV, and this could easily be worth 30 EV, which is twice that. So this is the one chip on the basis of which I can say that there's legitimately some hope left for my season.
Yeah.
If this were a normal season with just the 3 chips that are left, I don't think there was a hope that for me to have a good OR this season. But this chip is just wild. I mean, you could gain easily 30-40 points on the field. But then again, it's equally bad, right? You lose 30-40 points. Like I've lost already a ton of points on Salah. So I don't know. When we come to that, we can discuss more about the AM chip.
Yeah, it's a good point, to be fair, because I think when you look at like the chip, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a dominant strategy in terms of how people plan to wildcard and maybe make transfers like during the chip.
Yeah.
And there's probably quite a sizable amount of free risk that you can get for going against that around that time. And it isn't even necessarily like going for a different strategy, which I think is, could be something that people devise after finding out like the FA Cup, like 5th round impacts, and then also, potential like sort of later Carabao Cup impacts. But yeah, you could just simply go with a slightly different managerial plan, and like just looking at the amount of points that assistant managers could, like, I mean, you're looking at like 10-12 points per game week, right? from your
I know,
AM,
right?
which is
It's
like
crazy.
that's like a captaincy haul, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it is quite mental. And yeah, we'll have to see what happens there. And I've even seen some people talking about maybe using it around the double game week 24, like around that patch.
Hmm.
Because I think there's like sometimes you can't eye up when there's, I suppose, let's say a team like Palace now who've been playing really well, and then a team like Brighton who've been playing really poorly. But when you look at their table positions like last week, you know, that like those are matchups that I think where maybe if you're really keen on team strengths and you just think directionally, like what's a good reminder of last season, like West Ham, you know, when they were like in a great spot, maybe like sixth last season, and then kind of fell down the table because they actually just were a bad team, and we were waiting for results to kind of represent that, but they had already like landed on a good position to start the season, so they were pretty much safe the whole year. Like there's going to be opportunities now where I think, yeah, you see some teams that you think are on the up from a team strength point of view, and there's teams like Brighton where, I mean, they're conceding ridiculous amounts of XGC. Like they actually look like a bottom table defense. So it's like not inconceivable that you could get a lot of value like trying to eye up specific just fixtures as they are, as opposed to just trying to go for some sort of crazy strategy. But that's if you already want to take on this much risk at some random point in the season, you've made that decision. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, an interesting trip, but it's a weird one. Do you like it overall? I guess just generally speaking.
It's so difficult because obviously the first answer on instinct is no,
Hmm.
just because it's adding so much more variance to the game, which and to be honest, there is a way they could have structured the chip. Maybe we can perhaps change the graphic because I guess we
Yeah.
are going to move into the AM chip itself. So for this one, I was thinking the table bonus element is what I think makes it a ridiculous chip,
Hmm.
because that just makes you want to punt on bottom of teams,
Yeah.
and it's so ridiculously overpowered, that element of this chip, that the goals scored and clean sheets are just going to be irrelevant at that point, because this one element can outperform all of that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking maybe they could have added some negative elements to this as well. For example, two yellow cards is -1 point, or two goals conceded is -1 point, but from a team, because obviously if it's every player, then it's going to be really bad in terms of multiplicative effect. But if they had introduced some sort of negative points as well, maybe this could have been a less powerful chip.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they did try it, and the numbers didn't match up to what they were expecting to see. Because I'm thinking the reason they brought this in mid-season was they needed some data for this season to test it out, which
True.
I don't understand why they could have just used data from, let's say, the past 10 seasons, and they could have, run thousands of simulations on that. But giving them benefit of doubt on this, it's just it's hard to see why they came up with this. Other than that, only thing I would mention, and I'll pass this on to you because you've already also made a video on that on your own channel, and you've I'm assuming you've gone through quite a bit
On the
about
AM
how
trip?
to
No,
use
I
it.
haven't
Yeah,
actually.
you haven't?
I
Oh,
haven't.
wait,
Just
why?
because
Okay, so my
I mean,
bad.
yeah. No, but I mean, to be honest, I was waiting for, first of all, for some of the better minds to kind of do, you know, initial sort of runs of I guess the value of the chip. And I was waiting
Okay.
for that to come out. But just generally I think, look, I don't think there's honestly any point in planning around the AM chip unless you are
Hmm.
already playing it for it around 24, which just sounds crazy to me. So yeah. I haven't made a video on it yet. I am pretty pro the chip, but then I think I still hate the aspect of not actually telling players the full
Ahead of
rules of
time.
the
Yep.
game before the season
Yep.
starts, because I don't like playing
Yep.
games like that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we play to a rule set. It's not even from like a solving perspective, but just like I want to know what my like what feat I'm supposed to accomplish for the season, right? To do well. So yeah, kind of surprising us is nice. And yeah, the only thing that makes me sad is is that Merseyside Derby suspension, because I would have gotten away with a great TC play. And as we can see with this ship, like it definitely, I think, supplemented the idea that playing a TC early was a good idea if you wanted to bet positively that this chip was strong. And it's probably
Yes,
stronger than we thought it would be, right? Because
it
now we're
is. It
struggling
is.
generally
Yeah.
to find a bench boost window outside of Gameweek 36. So yeah.
Yeah. One last thing before we move on, which was right now, and of course there are people like FPL Nick and even I think Sartal who have posted numbers regarding EV
Yeah,
and especially
Elevenify and Review also have their numbers too.
11 fan review
And
because three
Simon,
game week
sorry.
rolling window and
Yeah.
Simon, yeah. The three game week rolling window is more important than just looking at raw numbers
Correct.
because the raw numbers are quite unimportant in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to look at a 3 game week rolling window, and I'm assuming that no one is going to waste free transfers on that, but to be honest, and we've had this discussion in group chats where potentially the FT could be worth more
I
on
think it
the
is, right?
on the manager.
Yeah, the swings can be
Yeah.
quite insane.
Yeah, especially if a team has played less games and you want to pivot to from one team to the other team who's going to be lower in the table just because they played fewer games.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's going to be quite ridiculous in that sense, like you said. One thing that we would point out is obviously try to look at teams which have underperformed, playing teams that have overperformed their XG or
Pretty much. Yeah.
or projections. So that's the one thing that I would keep in mind.
All right, sounds good. Should we jump into xMins? Because I think this is a good week where so many people might have already made moves to the direction of, let's say, your double gaming 24 for Liverpool, and people have already started investing to Trent. You've got Trent in your team, for example. I'm actually a little bit like on the periphery. Like I only have Salah. I don't know what I'm planning to do around it in terms of whether I go for Trent or not. I know I will get Trent, but when is my biggest question. And how to approach, I guess, triple Liverpool. Shall we start with Liverpool first? Because I think they're a pretty simple team to read. How would you approach tripling up on Liverpool?
Yeah, interesting point. And I was going to ask you the same question. If you are already sort of looking at Game Week 24 to plan your moves, because
because we're 8 games out, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the three assets from Liverpool that review is certainly pushing me more towards are Alisson, Trent, and Salah.
Yeah.
And for me, it is in that order. So Alisson was being aggressively pushed, but I just kept Keller because, first of all, I can wait till Game Week 23 to actually make that move. I don't need to hurry. Of course, Flecken is bad. It's just objectively bad, but this allows me just a tiny bit of breathing room. And I think Trent and Salah are just sort of shoe-ins. I don't see how people are going to go without them. The only reason, like you said, is maybe some fitness concerns, but I'm assuming they will either dissipate by Game Week 24 for Trent or he will be re-injured.
Yeah.
In which case, obviously, people will move on to Van Dijk, and everyone knows that Virgil always scores in a double game week. So it's of course this is lower, but honestly, the number of times I remember it happening, it honestly could be every single time. So I maybe I can go back and check if that has happened every single time.
Yeah.
Because he's been there for quite a long time now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you are seeing any different lines, but these three players are pretty much it for me. And of course, from an Everton perspective, the players I'm getting pushed are, let's say, so if I don't go for Alisson, I get Pickford and then Dwight McNeil. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I get Mikolenko too, I think, just because he's like 4.3, and I imagine like later down the line he could just be a good transfer from someone like Dunk, who I already hate anyways. You know, like shout out Lewis Dunk for being absolutely trash, and honestly Brighton as well. Sorry to any Brighton fans out there, but you know, I mean, they're watching the football more than me, so I'm sure they're well aware. I'm just kidding, but I just prefer to be on the right side of Lewis Dunk history, and just say that I regrettably owned. But all seriousness, going back to Liverpool, I think the biggest thing this season is like the team strength shifts mean that you probably want to go for a defender, and I think there is a possibility that Konate is back then. I assume if Tsimikas is fine, which is the situation with him is a bit weird because I don't think he's like close to coming back, even though I think Slot has mentioned that he is. It's just that when managers say certain players are close, I think it's completely meaningless because no one's defined what close means. And when I'm listening to like Fabian Hertzler pressers and I'm thinking about Kadioglu being close, it's like it's a joke, frankly. But Yeah, with Virgil, it's the team strength shift, and definitely for people like us who own Flecken, I don't know if you do own Flecken, right?
Yes, I
Yeah,
do.
like
Yeah.
for us, it's such a clear EV upgrade because there are generally very few good Flecken fixtures outside of Southampton away,
Yeah.
all the way till Game Week 24. In my case, I think I'll go Trent, but I'll probably actually go closer towards the deadline because City actually has so many good interim fixtures where I'm kind of tempted. Unless I think that, Trent's going to be an 89, 95 minute player, which I actually don't think he will. I think he's probably going to maintain these kind of like 80-minute substitutions over this period just to kind of manage the amount of fixtures that they have. Like, he is starting in this cup match, and I think quite a few people probably thought that he could have been benched today, but he's not, right? So he's getting a lot of games in his legs, whereas with Guardiola, I think he's kind of forced to play football. Maybe barring the small situation where you have, let's say, Rico, Stones, Diaz, Walker playing, I think Guardiola's minutes should be pretty safe with Ake and Akanji still like completely in the dark. So yeah, I'm kind of in a spot where to approach 24, I either go Flecken to Becker first, or I go Guardiola to Trent, and the gap between those two players is 0.9. So whatever move I make to sort of free up cash, I can make both options, and I kind of like the idea of going for Allison, but then it does feel like going back to what you're saying, I'm securing probably the third best player on paper now, but he might not be the third best player maybe when we get to Game Week 24. I don't know if Konate could be better. Potentially,
Yes.
he could be. And it's also plausible, I guess, if Jota somehow gets fit, or if there's actual injuries like in the opposite direction, right? If Jota's injured, a couple other players,
Yes.
you might suddenly find you don't want Virgil
Luis, yes.
as your triple up.
Yeah.
So that's something I've been thinking about. But then I also think if I'm in a position where I own Virgil, it's you're never gonna feel bad, I think, owning someone who plays for such a good defense. Liverpool have legitimately run Arsenal close on XGC, and I think getting Allison back is only going to be a boost to that, right? And same with getting Konate back, because I think they've only really been slipping post Konate. I know Slot likes to mention that Konate doesn't really impact the clean sheets, but I'm actually sure he does. So that's a soft little thing to think about. But who knows if keeping open like Mbumo we all own, and I think the tricky thing, and this will go straight to an Eze discussion later, but if you don't, let's say, want to spend money on Eze, or you don't want to transfer out Mbumo, like Jota is always there as a straight transfer. And there's also a lot of budget mids over this period that you need to think about that can change the way you suddenly are able to spend funds on, let's say, additional Liverpool players. So that's something I think that's worth keeping in mind, although it does seem pretty standard for us to go Trent, Virgil, and Salah.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Also, the Konate bit was very helpful because it served as a reminder to me. There were a few lines where I saw Konate, but like you said, it's under specific circumstances where, for example, if I ban Allison,
yeah,
or something like that, where I maybe lock in Kelleher, or if I do, let's say, Kelleher to Pickford as my move, and then I solve for everything else. So it's contingent on a couple of things, but you're right. It's not that no other assets are viable during that window.
Yeah.
It's just that the closer we get, it's better. Like, we can stack up transfers, right? It's not as if we can't now. So
exactly.
it's a perfect use of 5 free transfers, which is to have as many as you can closer to game week 24, and then make all your moves in 23 or 24. Because like I was thinking, Trent could have legitimately been rested for Leicester, but the only saving grace is that there's a full week.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps going to help Trent owners out like myself.
Yeah, and I mean, so Newcastle just scored. Sandro Tonali scored, which means Brentford are down. If anyone cares, but yeah, I mean the thing about that double game week is it's such a good fixture for Everton as well. So I think the idea that you save more transfers for whatever variation of Everton players you go for, at least like 2 out of 3, I think makes a lot of sense if you comfortably get to that position. And I think the issue is, as we lead towards double gaming 24, if you're suddenly making transfers outside of Liverpool and Everton players, which makes sense for Everton because their fixture run's poor, but for Liverpool, I think you can easily justify a transfer because you know that there's that long-term recouping at least of the double gaming 24. But the more transfers you make outside of Liverpool, the harder it is to, I think, optimize perfectly around that period where you can get that excess Everton EV, which I think is very real. Because to be fair to Everton, they've been a really good defense for a long time now, and I think they're actually comfortably the worst offense in the league. So if there's anything that they're good at, it's definitely defending. So yeah, I mean, definitely a team to want to be invested into, and there's no reason to ignore them, I would say.
No, and we saw this in double game week 34 last season, right?
True.
It was the same fixture, and it was 0-0, which meant
Somehow,
that
yeah. Or no, I think Everton won, right?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. You're right. You're right. You're right.
Pissed
Yes.
me
So,
off,
so they kept.
but
Yeah. They
yeah.
kept a clean sheet, which meant that Pickford absolutely wiped the floor with any other goalkeeper who was in contention for that game week. So of course it's not going to happen the same way, but the thought process is still there where you just don't want to write them off because they are playing Liverpool. There's the other game as well, and then the EV is still there. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Shall we move on
I
to?
guess, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to that discussion. I think. I'm sure there are teams in the world that own Eze and Mbumo, but I think for most of us, I think I can speak freely and say that you've got maybe, let's say, a template 3-part midfield, right? You've probably got, I think, close to everyone has Salah and Palmer, not you, but you have 2 out of 3 out of Salah, Palmer, Son, and Saka, right? So just by owning 2 of those players, you're probably already quite cash strapped. On top of that, I think people's third spot is either one of those players once again, or a Bruno. And then that just means you've got 3, like a lot of money spent on those players. You probably have 1 premium forward right now or 2, like an Isak, Solanke, and Jackson, 2 out of 3, or 1 out of 3. And just by spending so much on these players, there's not many spots left, right? And Mbumo is usually almost everyone's 4th midfielder. Maybe he would have been shipped out by some people already, and I think that's already totally fine because, I think, for example, if I had more free transfers a couple of weeks ago, I might have actually been minded to sell Mbumo, but I didn't. However, I think Eze is like the common option now to bring in over this run because he's one of those options who frees up cash from Mbumo that gives you that sort of Liverpool spending money, and on top of that, he just generally has a good run. But his minutes so far have been absolutely deplorably bad. I find it super hard to believe that his minutes will get better just based on how tight the fixture run is and how poor his minutes have been, right? Like, even if you look at this period recently, that substitution versus Brighton is frankly scary because it was like knock related, but he starts versus Arsenal, which I'm sure he'll play a lot of minutes for because they want to lock down this match. And then there's pretty tight turnarounds, generally speaking, between like December and early January, right? So, for example, like when he plays Bournemouth and then Southampton and then Chelsea, it's 26, 29 December, then 4th of January. That's a pretty tight turnaround. And then I think in January, the issue too is that they've always been going full strength in cups. He's going to play Stockport in the FA Cup, I think, unfortunately. And then he's got Leicester and West Ham on the 15th and 18th. So 12, 15, 18. So there's definitely lots of periods where these are the best fixtures for Eze, but I'm not sure if we're quite going to get the minutes that we want out of him. And then there's the element of pen share, which I think, let's just do like some quick maths, right? I guess my question to most people would be, how many penalties do you think Palace would get until the end of the season? And I'm guessing it's going to be something like 3 or 4 penalties on average. I'm not sure. Do you think that's maybe even too far?
Yeah. It's weird because, again, there is such a wide error bar when it comes to predicting penalties. So we have to start somewhere, and I guess we can start maybe by overestimating how many penalties they'll get. So let's stick with 4 for now.
Yeah.
And see where we go.
So say you get 4. I think we've calculated that, you know, the EV of scoring EV of getting a penalty is around 3.6, right? Because you need to factor in 0.8 times goal plus 0.2 times missing, which is like -2.
-1, 2, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like 3.6.
Yeah.
If you guess, I guess that there's 3 or 4 penalties for the rest of the season, you're speaking roughly between like 11 to 14, 15 EV. You split the remaining games left in the calendar, like 22. And suddenly, I think that for me, I was calculating that to be around an average sort of minutes impact of like 4 to 6 minutes. If I still keep him as like a 10% penalty taker. Because there might be scenarios, yes, of course, in the future where Mateta could be subbed off and Eze could stay on and he could score. But I think, yeah, like we tend to look at penalties over a period, but I think the reality is of how penalties work is it's always what happens until the next penalty, right? And then things can change.
Yes.
Like say I miss a penalty and suddenly I'm back as a penalty taker, that sort of thing. So I think until Eze takes that next penalty, or Mateta does, right, the expectation it has to be that he probably is like a 10% penalty taker, which I think takes away maybe around 4 minutes football on average. His minutes are already really poor. I think that the defaults and review still feel like a little bit high because we've seen how he's been rotated over this period. And also looking at market odds, I think that's probably suggesting a little bit of the gap in terms of the penalty aspect. But we also know that Eze does a lot of things like set pieces, a lot of shot spamming, a lot of bonus actions, like drawing fouls, shots on target. So you can say that maybe review takes into account that a bit more. But yeah, I do think that he feels like a player that looks so simple on a default solve to get to, but then I'm not so confident that he's like a great transfer, because selling Mbeumo also means you lose 0.3. You probably want Mbeumo back in the future. And yeah, I think there's the added question of, are there any other budget midfielders in the game that are quite interesting? Or could you even like start spending more money in the midfield position, because the forwards actually look pretty poor? Because I think a couple of weeks ago we were spoiled for choice, right? You had Strand Larson, even Delap arguably, Cunha, Wood, who I still think remains a very good pick, Raul with maybe slightly shakier minutes, but definitely still looks like the number one. João Pedro, but that removes Welbeck, who's also been out recently, and there aren't too many options. Like Evan Nilsson hasn't been producing, but we also know that Bournemouth are about to enter into a tougher fixture run. So for a lot of the budget players, you've got worse fixtures, you have less forwards to choose from, and I think it probably makes sense to actually spend more money in the midfield if you can. But then Liverpool requires you to spend more money on defense and goalkeepers. So that I think has created a bit of a tricky landscape, and I don't love what I'm seeing from my default solves. I've tried to ban Eze, and the solutions are spend more money on defense, spend more money on offense, potentially like in the forward position, or like get someone like a Bruno in place and actually have like an overstacked midfield. I don't know what your thoughts are on Eze. Maybe you can, like my minutes projection for him is like something like 72, 73, and I think that could even be maybe a touch high because of the penalty impacts that I talked about.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I had, and I said this prior to the Brighton game.
Mm-hmm.
I had him at 60, and he got subbed off at 59, which is an incredible coincidence. It just sort of vindicated my skepticism when it comes to his minutes. And I agree with everything that you've said. I don't need to state the same things. The one thing that perhaps we need to look at is, and I think you are the one who pointed this out in our group chat, right? Where you were saying that who is he competing with?
Exactly. Yeah.
We also need to look at that, right? And perhaps if there's no one else and you really feel like you need to downgrade a Mbeumo and spend the cash somewhere else, I guess the question is Eze plus 2 free transfers what fixture an Mbeumo has? Or is more than whatever fixture an Mbeumo has?
Yeah.
And, sorry, I said it the other way around. I should have said Eze versus Mbeumo plus 2 free transfers. So it's really a question of that. And I'm assuming for most people, the answer, like you said, is going to be no, just because you lose the value in Mbeumo.
Yeah.
Especially now, right? Because the back-to-back performances have made sure that he's not going to drop in price now. Because the one thing that you would have feared is, a couple of price drops on him, and then all of a sudden you don't have any sell value left in Mbeumo. Which would have perhaps have made him an easy sell. That's something that we can debate. But I just don't. The thing is, I think Kamada was in the doghouse for a little bit after his red card, and Nketiah was injured. And now it looks like everyone seems to be welcome, or at least to a certain extent, because we saw in the Brighton game that Kamada and Nketiah came on for Mateta and Eze. So it's just that the more players that are involved, and Sarr seems to have locked in one of the number 10 positions, which just makes it even worse for others that are competing, because Sarr, we've seen when he was at Watford as well, he was their main penalty taker. Now, I'm not going to say something ridiculous like he might take a penalty over Eze. But again, there is that uncertainty, right? So, yeah, it's just going to be very difficult for me to justify buying Eze, but it's either go to Bruno or downgrade to someone like Rogers, because you might
Okay.
as well save the money. Yeah, and do something with it in defense.
I was waiting for another
So,
midfielder to potentially be mentioned, but I don't know if you
okay,
want to
Enzo
jump into that.
Fernandez. Okay,
Oh
yeah.
no, wasn't
Oh,
Enzo
really?
actually. Was Mr. Diallo.
Okay, nice. Okay. I thought because you mentioned him a couple of times,
Yeah.
on your timeline as well. I was going to talk briefly about Raul
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
you
Go for
mentioned
it.
him, and this is the game, right? Where if you want to buy Raul and he does not start this game, it will completely scupper all your plans, or at least in terms of EV, you will be in potentially be in a deficit moving forward, because this is the game where you want him to play, let's say 75 to 80 minutes. And if you think that's, do you think that's happening? Going to happen, first of all? And if you do, are you planning on buying him for Kuna if Kuna gets banned?
That's the thing, right? He's gotten a week's worth of rest, I suppose, but I think my issue is how good is he long term, I suppose, because it's going to be, yeah, okay, I get some short term gain if Raul plays really good minutes this game week, but it's hard to guarantee that. And um, I don't like the idea of spending so much money on a player that I think could be a bit flimsy in terms of minutes in the future, especially since I think there is congestion around when you want to optimize for like the next best Raul games.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that's the only thing I take issue with Raul. And it's also like, for example, if I go into Jackson, who is not like a perfect 90-minute player, like I know I'm getting value out of Jackson because he should be starting most games. He has the same issue with Raul, I think, where he could get benched, but probably like I wouldn't have the fear that I guess Raul could suddenly, or Jackson could suddenly get deposed, right, from that position of being like the number one
Yeah.
player.
Also,
Whereas
npxG per 90 is a thing, and
yeah, and he's pretty good
also
at
team
that.
strength. Yeah,
True.
team strength is also a thing. So maybe there's something to that. And your skepticism is well founded, right? It's not as if it's come out of thin air. This we're actually seeing Muniz come on and also start a game. So
True.
it's not as if this is completely unfounded. It's just a question of does he start Southampton? Because if he does, then you already cover a huge chunk of EV that you're going to get from him anyway.
Yeah, I think like in my case, another thing I'm thinking about too is, going into Raul kind of locks me into him, right? Whereas if I keep
Mm.
the optionality and I've got Cunha, for example, who probably should still play this weekend, does that still leave me with, an option of going for other players, like maybe a Wood, right? Somewhere between that
Mm.
Jackson and Raul price point, but maybe with different, tweaks of my squad, I could be a bit happier with that. And I think it comes down to, once again, whether you have confidence in those like budget mids, how you feel about Eze. Because if I go to someone like, let's say, Raul, then I almost kind of have to go down to Eze or less to get that third Liverpool player. If I, let's say, have I don't know, for example, like if I go for someone like Wood, it actually means I might be starving myself out of a Liverpool player and the chance to get Eze as well, right? I'd probably have to go straight down to Amad Diallo to be able to get the cash to move into both Allison and Trent. So those are the kind of things that are like what I'm dealing with. But yeah,
Mm.
Roll is like a very interesting option. I think one of the things too that I don't like is ultimately at that sort of price point of 5.x, you've got Vardy, and you've got Armstrong as well, who are I think the competing options.
And
It
JSL.
Yeah, but I think JSL will have tougher fixtures unless you also think he's on penalties,
Yes.
which means maybe he could actually be really good over this run, anyways.
Mm.
But I
Oh
find
yeah. Oh
yeah.
oh, you mean if Kuna is
Yeah, yeah,
banned
yeah. I
in
think
in
I
that
think
case?
that's what
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
would keep JSL
yeah,
viable, right? But we know Raul
yeah,
also
yeah.
has like much better baselines than most of the other players in
Yes.
this
Yeah.
bracket. So it's like if he suddenly is a bit of a defunct pick, then that's two free transfers once again booked for me in the future to just move structurally around Raul,
Correct.
as opposed to like, oh, I can just move straight on to Vardy. It'll feel like a bit of an L, basically, is how
Mm.
I would explain it. Um, one thing that I've been thinking about is I could go Cunha to roll anyways, and maybe just go Flecken to Alisson next game week, and then just be happy that I've set in place a lot of the Liverpool players that I want, and I can revisit Trent later down the line is something I've been thinking about. But what I could do is actually go out of Cunha into someone who's, let's say, a 4.4 forward, and then maybe I can go big at the back or big in the midfield, because Rodgers is not someone you can play every game, but I can definitely go into, let's say, a structure where maybe I go for Jota, actually, which I still think that there's some value in Jota, because I think he's one of those players where if he's playing like 65, 68 minutes, he's not actually a very bad pick in the game at all. But if he's playing, or sorry, I'd say maybe like if he's playing less than 75, he's probably a subpar option. But if he's actually playing around there, I think you can say that there's some value to Jota. But of course, we know he's not even in training this week. He's so injury prone. It's very hard for me to even guarantee that. But I mean, there's some options, right? And that's the tricky part of this period, because if I don't invest into Raul this week, it's very hard for me to believe that I would ever go into Raul ever after this. So it's also one of those things where I think the solver's looking at Southampton at home, the EV gain from that, and then thinking that it's a pretty good transfer. But it might be the case also that if Raul continues to start all these fixtures, that by the next time he has a good fixture, which probably is that Leicester at home game, or it's an Ipswich at home game, maybe around game week, I can't remember, is it 19 or 20? One of those fixtures where Raul definitely plays one of those players and teams where if he starts there and you think he starts there, then he's going to be a really good pick. And that's one of the things. Another thing about Raul too is he's not really playable in 18 or 19, because I think you'll be too scared with the suspension threat, or not suspension threat, sorry, but just like that sort of rotation threat that Muniz posed the last time around we had a midweek fixture. And I'm sure people have different conceptions of how to approach it, right? Like the idea that maybe Marcos Silva plays Raul for the tougher games where Raul is a better defender, and probably maybe slightly worse at hold up, but does a lot more actions in the game that you'd want versus a tougher team, versus Muniz, who we saw, for example, like Jackson got rested versus Southampton, right? I don't think it's out of this world to see Muniz suddenly start for Southampton. I generally don't. It might not happen, true. but yeah, I think those are the kind of concerns when you jump into someone like Raul, who feels both flimsy, but actually long term, if you can guarantee him being number one, he's just an amazing pick. And it goes back to that as a discussion where it's like, are the mins there? And it's hard to forecast that especially on a game week where you have to jump onto Raul now, it feels like. I find
the thing is, for Raul, it's in a sense, front loading EV is good, right? Because first of all, there is no decay.
True.
So in order for you to make a decision, it's literally a binary decision based on the upcoming week, which makes it much easier than what it would be if it were like, let's say, 4 middling fixtures in the next 4 game weeks.
True.
So that makes it easier, like you said. So if you think he is going to get reduced minutes or 30 minutes versus Southampton, then it's a no-go. The other thing is, because you mentioned Rodgers, and this is xMins corner, we have to give him his flowers. He's been insane. I genuinely don't believe how many minutes this guy has played. He might even surpass Bruno this season by the time the season ends. Yeah, no, I'm saying because if Bruno keeps getting subbed in these games around 80 just to manage his workload, and Rodgers keeps getting flogged every single game for 80 to 90 minutes, then there is a conceivable scenario where he could even play more minutes than Bruno. Of course, the more players Aston Villa gets back from injury, I don't know how it's going to pan out, but we've been saying this since game week 1, and nothing has happened. Kamara has come back, and Ross Barkley is playing, and everyone is playing, but one player that has played every single game is Morgan Rodgers. So yeah, exceptional xMins there. And the other one I am spacing out on. By the way, just to mention briefly that Munoz is suspended versus Arsenal, so it's great for Solves because you can just set him back to 93, whatever you want to, from game week 19 and solve based on that. There was one player that you mentioned. I'm spacing now, but maybe I'll remember. Diallo. So Ahmad and Ahmad, I was going to briefly talk about how Amorim's sort of xMins picks are coming up, because there's been a lot of chopping and changing every single week, and we've also seen what he is doing in Europa League games as well. And from what I see right now, I had a reasonable suspicion that Dalot was going to be a mainstay, which he has been. It's simply because he is robust and he can play every single game. It's as simple as that. And I told people that Mazraoui's problem is that he's actually made of Weetabix, and that's what happened against City. He got subbed off, and now there's talk that he's actually tweaked something, which was inevitable because he also played wing back in that game, and it was never going to work in his favor just because. Look, he's an exceptional footballer. I love the fact that we got him this cheaply. It's just that I think in Amorim's system, he is much better off as a right centre back rather than playing right wing back. But Dalot is perhaps the only defender I would go just because Sandro keeps getting injured randomly, especially during international breaks, and maybe he does not start every single game because Maguire is three at the back, and Maguire just go hand in hand. He's been so good for all the games where he's played under Amorim.
Yeah.
So MDL, Maguire, Lisandro Martinez, and Mazraoui, if he starts competing back in the three centre back spots, again, you don't want to buy any of them in that case. So it's Dalot or bust. Onana, I still maintain that he is one of the best goalkeepers this season in the game. But again, it's money. If you want to spend that much money, you might as well spend it on Alisson, who plays the second best defense, or maybe even the best defense in the league this season. So I would say that. And then when it comes to midfielders, I honestly think because Rashford has gone ahead and did what he's done, with all the Henry Winters thing coming out today.
Yeah.
It's so weird. Look, Amorim has been very he appears to be candid. I don't know if he's actually candid, which is a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And based on what has happened, if let's say Rashford's career is over at United, then I would say that Ahmad is basically nailed. Also because that guy was making runs from right wing all the way to left wing in the 91st minute of the game.
Yeah.
So it's not just the fact that he got an assist and a goal, it's the fact that he was running full speed and full bore for 95 minutes.
Yeah.
So seems like he's pretty robust. And in that case, he's an absolutely viable option. The only thing is, are you going to buy him instead of Bruno? Because I don't know if he has minutes guaranteed to that level, but it is pretty close, to be honest, because there have been very few players who I would say have perfectly adapted to this system. I think Ugarte has come through, but he was always going to come through because he's not a bad player.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think he's exceptional at anything, which is going to be a problem later down the line when we actually want to be a serious club or a serious team again.
Okay.
So, yeah, in the meanwhile, it will do because he's definitely an upgrade on someone like Casemiro, who simply doesn't have the legs anymore, which is a shame. And that doesn't tarnish his Real Madrid legacy, but unfortunately, he is washed, as they say. So I would say that Ahmad, Bruno, and Dalot are perhaps the only three players I would look at. Højlund is great, by the way, and he's fitting well. But again, Zirkzee has already come in for a Premier League game, so yeah, there's very little to choose from there.
That's fair. Do you think Diallo's going to play many more minutes in that sort of 10 position?
See, that's exactly. I forgot to mention that. But unlike someone like Enzo Fernandez, where his role is pretty much defined in the system, in Maresca's system, Diallo's is not. Diallo's is not, which means that he's playing. Let's assume it's 50-50 for the sake of simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you work out,
which I think is so much better from an EV perspective than it was like 4 weeks ago, right? Yeah. So
100%, 100%. Which is why I would never have even talked about him 3 weeks ago. But now the fact that he's played in the number 10 position for 2 games in a row, where we really needed the wins, right? I mean, of course, we need to win every single game, but given the fact that we are so close to being on the verge of the playoffs, and I still think we will end up in the playoff positions because we've drawn far too many games to get in top 8.
Yeah.
But even with that, just to get a better seeding, it's really helpful to see that Ahmad is now firmly being considered for those positions. And from a minutes perspective, it does help because okay, let's say there's a game where Mount comes back, which okay, he's going to play 10 minutes and he's going to be back out. But let's say he actually manages to last the game.
Yeah.
I still think that means Ahmad just moves to wing back.
I think we might have lost John Fortis, but he was just about to say that Ahmad Diallo is the best pick in the game. So, yeah, we'll leave that segment at that. Yeah, I don't know. We'll wait for him to come back, but I think Ahmad's a really interesting pick, even for me, and he's definitely one of the few options that I've considered to sort of replace Mbuma with if I want to make big structural changes to my team. And yeah, I mean it's an interesting FPL landscape. Let's just put it like that. Yeah, we lost you for a bit, but I basically told the chat that you were gonna say that Ahmad's the best pick in the game. Oh, lost him again. That's fine. But yeah, I mean, one of the tricky things too is I think people are now considering like moving into a structure where you have 2 budget midfielders, but it goes back to that point for me with how much money can you spend on the strikers whilst also being able to spend adequate amounts of money for the Liverpool players, because that's something that I'm still struggling with, right? Like let's say I go Ahmad and suddenly I go Jackson, right? Replace Mbeumo, replace Cunha. I've got some money in the bank, but not enough money in the bank to really get Liverpool players, which is I think why Ahmad for me is not necessarily some sort of break point. But I can understand in someone else's position that they don't have even that luxury, I suppose, of being able to double up on Isak and Jackson whilst also owning Trent. So it's not even a consideration for them. You just go for someone like Chris Wood instead, or maybe someone who else is kind of competing with Chris Wood, like Evan Nilsson potentially, right? So a player like that at that sort of price point, and suddenly everything's free. Like you have the Trent money, you've got the Flecken money, you've got the Alisson Becker money. So that's definitely something that I think is nice that Ahmad can provide to the table. But I also feel like maybe because I have a little bit more money than most, in my position, I'm not that Ahmad curious. But from all my time really looking at models, like looking at how markets reflect on attacking players from United all this time, and looking at how models like Elevenify has been treating players like Garnacho and Rashford, like I just have to imagine if you have someone who has got good minutes, good share of good attacking positions, that Ahmad's just going to be one of the better picks. But yeah, I mean, I guess we don't need to overhype how good he is as a pick, because I think when you look at his historic underlyings, it's not like he's some god tier player. I think the positional share element is going to be a huge benefactor for him, but he's already overperformed quite a fair bit this season. So maybe we should also temper our expectations just a bit. But I think, yeah, for all intents and purposes, great player right now that we have access to. But Ismail Assar, I think, is also one of those top picks that we didn't touch on through the Eze discussion, but is, for me, in the consideration of being one of the best budget mids, so long as you believe that he will sort of retain this gigantic minute share that he's had as an attacking player. I don't know. JD, are you back or...
I am, but I don't know how am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible now. It's all good.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay, that's great. So yeah, I mean, I like Sar, and I already mentioned that when he was playing for Watford, he was definitely a consideration from an FPL perspective. I don't know, because everyone is back, and I know I was the one who said he's pretty much locked down one of the spots.
Yeah.
I still would like to see a couple more games where if he still continues to start despite a variety of circumstances, like okay, midweek cup game, does he start again, or Nketiah plays instead of Mateta, does he start again, or if Kamada plays, does he start with him? So stuff like that. So maybe just a couple more game weeks, but his price point is again a little weird, right? Which is what you mentioned about Ahmad as well. So
Yeah.
someone like you don't even need to go there because that position, 5 million midfielder, it's a weird one because if you keep benching them every single week, why did you even go there? Just go for dribbling and save even more cash.
Mm-hmm.
And if you actually want to play them every week, the EV is not there for many game weeks. Like you can't have them as your seventh attack, or maybe you can, but it depends. So, for example, my team, I will definitely need to consider him because I haven't gotten the 0.8 or the 8 price rises from Salah. I lost 0.1 from Haaland. So I might need to consider someone like him as my seventh attacker. So it could just be a straight shootout between Enzo and Ahmad. And also, I don't know if Enzo has gotten his fair share of set pieces in his EV, but let's say he has, based on the fact that it's been a couple of game weeks now since we know that he's been taking a chunk of set pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird one for me. I think, and it goes back to my point of, look, there's some value to just holding Mbumo as well. Like, you know,
it is.
We're putting so much fuss into all these midfielders, but how bad is he to be worth using that transfer on? Because I find it harder to go super down budget, and then I also find it hard to go into Eze. I know the line looks clean, right? Like when I see the line on the solver, it looks great. Like I've got, all the money in the world to put into my Liverpool players, but is it the best way to go around it, particularly when we're still so many game weeks out from Game 24? I think as long as you've maybe locked in like 2 Liverpool players as of like, let's say next game week when they've got Leicester at home, you can still delay some of these Liverpool moves a little bit. I think, maybe around Game 23 when they've got Ipswich at home. So yeah, I think that's a good chunk of discussion. I think we've covered a lot of the budget mids. Shall we just quickly entertain Solanke before we close off this episode? And maybe let's just discuss Solanke, Isak, Jackson. Not really an xMins discussion, but I think a discussion about what you want to do with your squad, what structures are nice. How do you feel about players like Isak? Because I think I find it interesting. I went to Isak 2 weeks ago, and more people now want to go into Isak, even though we've already skipped 2 or 3 good fixtures from him, because it seems like his baselines have shifted up again. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. At the same time, I have to mention, like, as someone who's been tracking the XG of all these players for the whole course of the season, Solanke's had really respectable XG.
Yes.
Jackson has had better, but he also plays less minutes of football. I think when you average it out, they're actually very similar picks. But then maybe you can argue that Tottenham's XGI share is a little bit different, like in the sense that Brennan occupies a lot more of that XG in much the same way that Palmer does. But then there's also Son, who takes pen share, Madison as well, Kulishevsky as well. Newcastle have scored. Trent assisted Darwin, by the way. And we'll find out who scored. Sandro Tonali again, maybe another free kick. Who knows?
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
But yeah, I think that's kind of what's on my mind. I think that there's a world where I could go maybe like, it sounds crazy, but I've thought about Cunha to Raul, okay, and then maybe like Dunk to Trent, and then Mbumo to Ahmad. It's something that I've been thinking about for next game week, and this allows me to keep Guardiola in my team. I don't know. Do you like that? Thoughts?
Yeah, because you've moved to Isaac prior to all of this, as in it's not that you're moving in now just for the Ipswich away game.
Yeah.
Which I would say that is the worst of these 3 good fixtures, even though it is Ipswich. I still think that, like you said, the baseline shifting has worked in your favor, where you have gotten the price rises out of him. You already have higher team value. And for someone like you could genuinely entertain the thought of keeping him for as long as he's fit. Yeah. That's the reality. And in that way, you save up free transfers because I believe this has been quite a few game weeks since you've had 2 free transfers, right? In which you do this game week. Yeah. And there's a potential for you to actually roll and have 3. But again, Kuna's suspension might kill that dream. But you could still have 2 next week. And this is exactly the time where you reap the rewards of having gone for Isaac earlier than most, and having gone for or having kept Mbumo and perhaps planning on keeping him for the long term. And by the time you get to Game Week 23, if you have, let's say, 3 to 4 free transfers, I think you will be in a better position than most players. Just because you went early on Isaac and you skipped all the stuff where you went from Solanke to someone else and then from someone else back to Isaac and just looked at, let's say, EV across 8 to 10 game weeks or even 12 game weeks and just decided on one player, which is what I've been trying to do as well. It's just that it hasn't worked out for me yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will at some point. But yeah, that's always the plan. And I think for you, it's definitely working out and it has already worked out.
What do you think about a potential move for me just to go Guardiola to Trent this game? You can go Cunha to Raul.
No, I actually don't think.
Yeah,
I actually don't. Just because until City have enough defenders back, even though Guardiola has been so bad in defense, there's just no world where he doesn't play 90 minutes. So I just don't see the point. And it's a weird thing, right? And see, I'm one of those people who firmly believes in EV because once you start questioning the tenets of EV, then the whole thing comes apart. Because where do you draw the line? So I'm not going to do a thing where I say, okay, Guardiola is not being fairly represented in EV. I just think that he's an awkward player to model because
it's so hard, right? Because it's like the central center
back
piece.
Where does he play? Where does he play exactly? And all of it is contingent on who is available for City, which is very rarely the case with players. I'm sure people will find exceptions to what I've just said. But again, like I said, the exceptions will prove the rule that in general, we have players who are wedded to certain systems and certain positions. And it seems like Guardiola is not that player. I could say the same about Rico Lewis as well. But the thing with Rico Lewis is he is not nearly as prolific as someone like Guardiola. So perhaps there is a different conversation there. But it is a similar conversation, I would say, with both Rico Lewis and Guardiola. So the fact that you've held him, again, just feeds into the same thing of having bought Isaac early and keeping Isaac for the long term, which is that you don't want to keep spending free transfers. And if I were in your position, I would just wait till closer to Game Week 24 to make that decision. Because I think the decision could be made for you in the sense that Trent could just be unavailable for double Game Week 24.
Yeah, that's fair. I do like Trent for Leicester at home, though. That's what sort of appeals to me so much.
Yes.
And it makes me feel like if I have the free transfers, do I just go there?
No, so see, you can wait this week, right? I think this week is the perfect week to wait.
Yeah.
Because Tottenham away for Trent and Villa away for Guardiola.
Yeah.
Is it really? I think it's 6 of 1. I really don't think there's too much in that.
Would you potentially go Cunha to Raul in my position and just kind of like still leave, I guess that, or do you think it's actually worse for optionality, right? Potentially.
The way you talked about the price points, and I have also looked into this myself because I have a dead forward spot right now and I have Dibbling, so I'm really on the edge where.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I could potentially do Chiwome back to Raul, and that would be my 7th attacker. But then I was thinking that really makes my whole squad very inflexible.
It does,
because, like you said, I'm not going to play Raul a lot. And if I'm not going to play him a lot, then I have to find some other solution to this problem.
Can I just say, apparently there's news that Evan Ferguson has been touted as a potential loan option for Fulham. Apparently.
That's crazy. What?
Which I don't really believe it, just because you're kind of strengthening a very good team. But for me, I think it is mental, right? Because I think, first of all, Fulham just battered Brighton, and the idea that you'd give them a good quality player to help them in their league campaign against you sounds like a huge stretch for me. So I don't think it's really gonna happen. But I guess even the idea that Fulham are going for another striker already kind of makes me question the whole Raul option. But then I'll probably have to throw this back at you, like how reliable is Miguel Delaney in your mind?
Oof. Oh, that's a tough question. But coming back to the Raul point,
Yeah.
it's really dependent on Southampton. And okay, I'm not going to sit on the fence any longer. I don't think he has great minutes in that game.
Okay, fair.
I just don't think that.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then what's the point?
Yeah.
There's really no point in doing that. And again, you can delay the decision, right? Let's say in 2 weeks' time, Muniz is injured. You can make that decision then for Leicester. Oh no,
True.
Ipswich, like you said,
Yeah.
whenever that game is. So unless you're losing out on a huge chunk of EV, which I don't think you are, based on my estimation of his minutes, I don't see why you can't just roll this week. Or if Kuna is out, I don't know
That's
if
true, yeah.
you have
that
some
kind of
other move
forces
in
my
mind.
hand potentially, but
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty good discussion. Any other
It
picks that
was.
we've kind of missed out on potentially?
In terms of minutes, I really don't think so. I think we've covered whatever we had
Yeah.
discussed. So perhaps we can move on to captaincy.
Yep, sounds good. Actually, we didn't touch on Solanke, but I think your general point is trust the model, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, sorry, you're right. Yeah. We missed out on that, but yeah, I would still trust the
I
model.
think we can
and,
save that discussion for next week, where we will present some data on MD versus MO.
Yes.
And just kind of like that gradual progression on some of the key picks that we find to be, like present in a lot of our like elite teams per se. But yeah, let's just jump into Q&A. Thank you guys so much for listening to.
No, I think we've missed out captaincy.
Oh, sorry, captaincy, right? Of course.
Yeah.
That looks wrong. This looks right. So yeah, I mean, captaincy, I've done this now by sorting players to 95 because I think that we have enough players this week that they're all 95-minute players where I'm not really concerned about the idea of putting their names forward and adjusting their minutes to 95 just for the presentation. But yeah, Salah clear, Palmer a little bit short, Isak pretty close behind, and then Bruno and Saka a little bit ways out, closer to Haaland, those two players in specific. You've not got Salah, so I assume this is a Palmer captaincy week for you?
Yeah, most definitely. Because I was thinking last week as well against Spurs. The previous game week where I captain Haaland, and I was thinking he is genuinely in and you pointed this out to me prior to that game week as well, that he's genuinely now better than Haaland in terms of EV. Or at least he's matching Haaland.
And so is Palmer,
in terms
right?
of EV.
Which is crazy.
No, I'm talking about Palmer.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Palmer,
Salah
okay.
obviously
My bad. Yeah.
I was actually talking about Palmer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's mental because there's no world where I was thinking that was a possibility. So that's great. That just means that I have a legitimate captaincy option most weeks. I know game week 18 is going to be brutal because Leicester, there's no fixture. There is no player who is coming close. It's so funny. My plan is to buy Bruno either this week or next, and Trent has closer EV to Bruno than Salah. It's that bad.
I see.
That fixture is ridiculous. So I'm going to suffer in game week 18. What's new? So I've suffered for almost all the game weeks till now.
Fair play.
So I like the fact that I can captain Palmer for the next 2 weeks, and we'll see where we go from there.
Will we ever see you own Amad Diallo, or you? I think you tend to be slightly pessimistic on xMins of your own players from your own team, if I can say that.
Yeah, that's a very fair statement. I often think that when I start talking about our players, I think just the inherent instability of the club means that I don't know what's going to happen next week.
Right.
And so I start baking in all eventualities into these xMins.
Gotcha.
Which obviously will sometimes pan out badly, like it did last season. Like, for example, a lot of players own Garnacho, and he absolutely went nuclear in
and I liked him too. I remember, but I just never had him. Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I don't know. I just keep thinking, okay, he's playing well, but I'm surely Ten Hag is going to rotate and play someone else here. But never happened. So
but no, that did happen, right? Like people got Garnacho coming off the bench scoring a brace or something like that, if I remember.
Oh, you're right.
And things like that. So it's.
I think I was just remembering the Chelsea game, which was particularly horrendous. Yeah. So in any case, I think my trust in Bruno is perhaps what leads me to underestimating or maybe being pessimistic about other United players.
Got you.
But Ahmad could genuinely be the exception this season.
I think
And
so.
it's just that I keep coming back to that price point.
I like him so much. I really do.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, once again, it's like he's the type of move where you almost have to make like three free transfers, right? Because it's like going from Mbeumo to Ahmad, you probably can't spend that all in one go. So you then have to make 3 moves. And yeah, and then it's also, I've spunked so many moves in that direction. It doesn't feel so good moving out of Mbeumo. I think time will tell. But I think what I like the most about Ahmad actually really is that I just think that, you know, we have models, but I think we it's very easy to intuit where models can move if you understand how models work. And I do think that, like, if you're telling me Mount is a hospital patient, which he is, if you're telling me Rashford is not going to play football because he's on the way out, which he is, and you're telling me that, you know, I guess Garnacho is already like somewhat on the naughty step, but I think generally you can see Bruno, there's a preference for him to also play deeper sometimes, right? So
yes,
it all kind of lines up to us being able to see a bit more. But then if Mazraoui is injured, that's a complication as well, right? That kind of forces him to almost just plug a gap for the team as opposed to what is in theory his best position on the pitch. I don't know. So I guess actually my decision making could actually depend on things like that, like some of the other injuries in the team and whether that impacts. Because is there a way that you guys could play? It's Malacia, isn't it? Right, playing Malacia potentially.
Yes, it is.
And he's been okay, I guess, coming back. He's played some European games. What do you think?
Yes. One thing I would mention is apparently Rashford has not traveled, obviously.
Yeah, I heard that.
But Garnacho has.
I heard that as well.
So it seems like Garnacho is still part of his plans, and I think Rashford is, to be fair to him. I don't want to.
Yeah, I think Amran was actually he spoke on Rashford today, and he's almost revised Rashford's quote. But I don't know if that's because he's great with the media.
See, that's exactly why I was saying that. Which is he being actually candid, or is it just a facade?
That's true, actually. Yeah, is he just better at the pressers than Ten Hag?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've had someone who had absolutely zero filters, like Louis van Gaal, and you know that sort of Dutch response to actually just stating facts rather than being maybe a little coy with the press, which is, I think, seems to be Amorim's strong suit.
Yeah.
But we'll see, and I think we can revisit this in a couple of game weeks, and I think maybe we can use Ahmad as well as an example of tracking MD versus MO and see where that ends up. Because I was thinking, now that you said it, perhaps the name of the game now is to anticipate reviews movement in terms of massive data.
Yeah.
And that is actually where you will gain edge.
I mean, personally, that's literally all I tried to do season long.
Yeah, I know.
And sometimes you sometimes get things wrong. Like I've gotten so many things wrong, I can tell.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think when you see genuine positional shifts for players, and you impute that it can happen, or like where a team strength is heading, and you think it's like reliable, because obviously, like, look, I know models adjust to every single thing every week, right? But it's like at the start of the season, let's be honest, like we probably saw Liverpool for 2 games, and you could have actually settled on the opinion that they're actually one of the best defenses, and I don't think at that time models had enough time to adjust truly to how good they are now. So, you know, just by simply, I guess, I don't know, even moving to Kanate, for example, at that point in the season would have been like an extremely shrewd move that probably gets rewarded like incrementally, but it could have also gone the other direction, right? We've seen, like, for example, Brighton have just hoodwinked us as a team. They started off the season with like great underlyings, played good football, are now firmly within the top half because of those results, and now they're actually playing like a relegation team, to be honest. Like if you look at the recent performances, they're getting bossed by Leicester almost, you know, in terms of XG, and getting crushed by Crystal Palace with obviously quite a few gifted goals. But that's the level of play right now, and sometimes things can change. But yeah, I think that's how most of us try to play, without trying to be a smartass, right? So but I like the idea, and we already know, as I said when you were probably disconnected, that we've seen how Man United attackers have been modeled in the past. Like I just think Ahmad will be fine if he plays in an attacking position, and more so, of course, in the 10. Right now, it doesn't seem like the market odds are that high on Ahmad Diallo, so I think we just need to be patient as well. Like it's the same thing with Enzo too. I think he's a pretty solid pick, and I think he's someone who's actually benefiting more from Chelsea's team strengths and maybe some instructions where he's allowed to take a couple more shots per game. He's on set pieces. Those are sort of like slight little boosts to his EV, but I think models have, for the most part, captured like someone like Enzo well, because as you said, his position is defined. But with someone like Ahmad, you know, you could be either reaping the rewards or suffering from, I don't know, Mizraoui being out and Malacia not being trusted, that sort of thing. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Shall we close out with the Q&A, because we did do the captaincy segment this time around. Thank you so much, Marku, Trini, all the other people who've been listening, or who will be listening, of course, catching up on this episode. Stella says, congrats on passing 1K followers. That's absolutely right. Thank you. If you're here, still here, do subscribe to the YouTube channel. That really does help support us out. Same with podcast platforms, all that kind of stuff, rating 5 stars. David Duke, hope you're well. Mo, thank you. Same with you. Semenyo to Ahmed, I mean, a good question, I suppose. It does free up some money. I think I would only really make that move if Semenyo was injured, to be honest. I don't think I would make that move now, unless you think you're price pinched and that 0.5, 0.6, I guess, value can do something really good for you. Luther Blissett saying, was holding Haaland hindsight optimal on MD considering Salah's blank in 15? Maybe it was, right? Maybe it was.
But the thing is, we need to also look at the EV movement, right? And it's easy to say it was, but
I think you got the mins right if you want to put it like that. But actually, one of the issues too with when you make moves is that, suddenly like the same team that looked amazing a week ago suddenly looks worse, and that's sort of what happened with Haaland. You've definitely won on XG rank, I'll say that. Because
have we though?
Have you?
Because the thing is, and what people.
The penalties.
I'll tell you something.
Exactly. Yes, the penalties.
What people keep forgetting is this is not npxG rank. This is just XG rank. And Salah got 5 penalties, so it's absolutely not true. We've lost big time on XG.
You think so?
Yeah, because XG is straight away 0.8, and Haaland's not getting 0.8 npxG on his own. It's very rare.
That's true. I think like the Southampton game and maybe the City game, that's where you started losing. But before that,
you had him, right? You had him for Southampton.
I had Haaland for Southampton, but I mean Salah's penalties. Salah's penalties for Southampton and City.
Oh yeah.
Those are the games that kind of bit you. But I think before that he was like getting wonder goals versus Brighton, like a nice chance versus Arsenal, right? It's those games where I think you've actually won on XG rank. So.
But see, you captain. Oh yeah, actually you're right, because you didn't captain him against City or Newcastle.
Yeah.
But you did captain him against Southampton, so I guess this half
potential loss on the Palmer captaincy though, right? Because of the 2 penalties.
Huge. Yeah. How could I forget about that? That's crazy. That's the worst.
That's the worst. Yeah. Not 1 penalty, but 2.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Aaron Bissouma.
Simicast's actually on the bench, so sorry, that's my bad. I didn't actually see the bench lineup, but that's good news, I think, for people who hate Robertson, I guess. Sorry. Salah says Dallow's price point is what puts people off of him. I agree. I mean, but I think it's also like you don't really want to be invested in a Man United defender at that price point. So I think Bruno's perfectly fine though, whether he plays a mix of deep and 10. And I think the less availability for Mount, the better. And it's still plausible that you just play Menu, Ugarte, and then have Bruno and Ahmad as your 10s, right?
Yes, of course. That I think that is still our best.
That seems like the best team right now. So I think that's a net benefit. And as we've seen, like, penalties are so important, minutes are so important, right? And Bruno still has that. I wouldn't say in spades in terms of minutes, because I know you're a bit sus on it, but I mean, what is the news on Mount?
I don't think Amorim has been certain in terms of time out. But I just think, like you said, he's just a hospital case at this point, which is extremely bad, and I do feel bad for him and the club as well, because we spun a huge chunk of money on him. Yeah. So
By the way, another 60-minute sub for both Kamada and for both Eze and Mateta in place of Kamada and Kedia. So I think
that's crazy.
Game management, right, from the manager there, but. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get the benefit of watching Eze on this weekend, seeing what his minutes are. But then I think anyone who's honest with themselves will have to look at these minutes and say, how different can it be over those 2 condensed periods that I mentioned, specifically at December and January? And we can probably make our decision then. Variance
Yes.
just makes a good question, which is just on what strategy you'd go for if you use the triple captain. I think if you follow loosely, I think that Ben Crellin strategy and you just don't triple captain 24, that's
Exactly.
one I would say is the meta strategy. I don't think anything changes.
Yep.
Salah says, who's the best differential captain this week since all the premiums have tricky away fixtures? I mean, to be honest, I think Isak's going to be the differential, right? Because he's a
Yes.
premium with an away fixture, but you're asking for me, like you basically just want to have a differential, right? It doesn't matter whether the differential's at home or away. Bruno, I think, is probably the best one with a home fixture, right? That's clear.
Yeah.
And he's the only one if you want specifically home. But if you want someone who just doesn't have, above 100% EO and it's going to be a differential for you, I think Isak is the one, really. Even though he's
Can
away.
I just point out that we repped Fulham and Bournemouth last season,
Oh, we did.
and turns out both of them are actually cooking,
Yeah.
which means that there's not a clear winner, but instead we can both pat ourselves on the back.
I think you've won out clearly. I mean, how many points down was I at the end of last season? Probably not too much. No, yeah, I mean they were neck and neck, 1 point away. So fine.
Yeah.
Maybe it's still all good for me with my Fulham, and they're still 1 point away this season.
Yeah, exactly.
Both
So
teams
that's what I'm
been
saying.
super impressive, and I think, to be honest,
Absolutely.
with Fulham, I think with both teams actually, you can probably say there's a great manager there, trying to maximize on a lot of their players, and I think Fulham actually have some worse players, and Bournemouth have a lot of talented players all over the pitch. So yeah, pretty impressive season so far.
Fully agree with that. Yeah.
Cool. I think that's it for us for this game week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Did you want to add any additional comments, JD?
No, it's just that pray that I get some positive variance for once in my life. But see, it's I've been playing so many fantasy league formats that it's cooked some places like UCL Fantasy and Sun Dream Team, and it's been really bad in Fan Team as well, which is perhaps even worse than doing bad in FPL because there's actual money on the line there. So I don't know. Hopefully it turns around, but from the looks of it, it's going to take some time. So we'll see. Perhaps this Palmer captaincy will kick things off, but very unlikely, I would say. Thanks. Thank you everyone for joining us. And like Fran said, don't forget to subscribe. Let us know if you want anything specific for us to talk about, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.